So in fact, we now move on to the most important part of the day, because of the reason, he's the person because of whom we are all gathered here today. But I would like one of my good friends again, Srivatsa, to come and introduce Professor Porter. He's been his student. He's known him for close to about 20 years, a little over 20 years. And that's where it is. Srivatsa, can you come up stage and do a quick introduction for Michael?
Thank you, Amit. Michael Porter is perhaps one of the few boundary spanners in this world. His influence extends across businesses, not-for-profits, and governments. There are very few presidents and leaders in the corporate world who haven't benefited from his immense thought leadership. I had the great privilege of learning and studying from him. And an interesting anecdote is to get into his course, first you have to get into Harvard Business School, for which you have to only clear the GMAT, which isn't very tough. To get into his course, there's another test, and his is the only course in Harvard where you take another test to enter his course. And people from across all the schools at Harvard University write that test to get into his course, and it is perhaps the most sought after course at Harvard. So that is something very unusual, and as the joke goes at Harvard, you have professors who come and sit in that course and learn how to teach the case method, learn how to teach like Michael Porter. 23 honorary doctorates. There are 24 university professors at Harvard, all of Harvard, and he is one of them. One of the highest, perhaps the highest honor the Harvard University bestows on everyone. He, at Princeton, was an all-American golfer and managed a rock band when he was doing his PhD at Harvard. He's a proud father to 2 daughters, one of whom works at the World Bank and is already creating waves there. I can only end by saying 2 things. One, for me, as a student, he's been a guru. Strategy is Porter, and Porter is strategy. And last but not the least, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday, Michael Porter turned 70. So we should all sing happy birthday and wish him the very, very best in life. Michael, all over to you. Thank you.
Well, my gosh. Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you for coming today and being part of this event. I have, of course, been very, very close to this Porter Prize over the last 5 years, and it's a real thrill for me, finally, to be able to actually be part of it. Congratulate Amit for kind of his entrepreneurial zeal in making this happen. He's awesome. An amazing effort. I want to thank Srivatsa, my treasured student from HBS, who has been my lifeline to India for many years. But I also want to thank all of you for participating in this and using this prize and this occasion for learning, first of all, to raise the learning in the organization, but also to use it as a vehicle for your company to hopefully move forward. And this whole thing is just amazing to me that it happened. And I'm very proud that it happened here in India, and I'm very honored that so many of you have been involved over the years. So today, since I'm here, only let me have a little time today. So I could talk all day, no problem. In fact, I'd enjoy that. But today I'm going to have a chance to talk to you about really 3 different aspects of my work. Starting this morning with the very core, the very original work, which still continues on strategy. So we'll start with strategy. And then a little bit later in the day or midday, we'll talk about the relationship between strategy and society and how we're starting to understand how business can actually play a much more powerful role in shaping the society around us. Something has been left to government and NGOs. I think we in business have to engage, because without us, without business, I think it's very hard for the other institutions to actually move an entire society along, like India. And this is a country, I think, that's ready for the business community to play a more fundamental, forceful, positive role in really driving the society. And so we'll talk about that. And then a little bit later in the day, related to the society issues, one of the most recent bodies of work that I have been involved in is called the Social Progress Index. And it's an effort to actually bring the same rigor to measuring and thinking about societal improvement as we've focused on economic improvement. As many of you know, I've been deeply involved in economic development for many, many years. I've worked with many countries. I'm very honored to have a chance tomorrow in Delhi to engage with your leaders about the strategy of this country. But I think what we've learned is that economic progress also requires social progress. But we haven't had the same measurement and rigor for thinking about social progress as we've had in the economic sphere. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I started an effort with Michael Green, who's here, a global effort to build really a benchmarking and measurement platform for how societies are improving or not improving. And we'll talk about that later today. Hopefully some of these topics will kind of give us a very broad picture of some of the most important questions we all have to address as businesses, but also will give you a chance to get a flavor to some of my newer work. Today I work in many, many fields. Beyond strategy, I work in healthcare. So I've involved in healthcare system reform all across the world. I'd love to talk about that today, but we don't have time. Next time. I've done a lot of work on the new digital technologies that were talked about earlier that are changing competition. The Internet of Things, smart connected products, how products and competition are changing as a result of technology. And that's a topic that we may want to discuss in the Q&A. I've written 3 or 4 papers on that. So my work has broadened since the last time I was here in India. It's been too long since I've been here, and I'm extremely excited to have a chance to actually experience this incredible country again. So with that introduction, let's start and talk about the subject that I think is my core subject. And I think the subject that remains really one of the areas that ultimately have the most impact on the success of a business. And that is having a clear strategy. And I think all of us would agree with that. But what I've found, and I continue to work with many companies around the world, hands-on, what I still see is, despite the fact that we all know that we need a strategy, despite the fact that we all understand, that word and how important it is, I think there's still a lot of learning necessary in most organizations. So hopefully this session will be an opportunity to give you kind of my latest perspective on how to think about strategy. You're going to see a lot of things that are familiar because I think some of the fundamental principles we introduced some years ago are stronger than ever. But we're also going to kind of, hopefully I'm going to get a chance to talk to you about some of the learning that comes from all this work in the field over so many years. It's kind of shocking to have a birthday like this, but I'm going to forget about that and focus on all the incredible amount of work that still needs to be done, and not get too comfortable with the past. So let's talk about strategy. I want everybody in this room to think about your company. And as we're talking, this is not a theory. This is about how to think about your own business and how you're developing, how you're thinking about it, the choices you're making, what choices you're making. So let's use this as a working session, and then over the course of the day we're going to hear from a number of other companies that are doing really interesting work. And hopefully we'll cumulatively, as a result of all of this, I think we'll all enrich our understanding of this very, very fundamental topic, strategy. Now, what have we kind of learned about how to think about strategy? Well, I think what we've learned is that the instinct that most leaders have about success, and most people actually have about success, is dangerous, is potentially distracting. What I find is that when you ask a company what success looks like, the answer that you get, I get a lot, is, well, I want to be the best company in my industry. I want to be the best bank. I want to be the best auto company. I want to be the best consumer packaged goods company in this category. I want to be the best. That's success. If I can be the best company in my industry, I will succeed. And that is a very natural human way to think. We all hope to be the best at what we do. But in business competition, and what we've come to understand is that's actually not the way to think about success. The reason is that there is no best company. So it's pretty dangerous to try to do something that's impossible. There is no best auto. There is no best insurance company. It all depends. It all depends. There is no best. There's no one way to compete. The biggest mistake in strategy is to think that there's only one way to compete. In every industry, there are different ways to compete, depending on what customer and customer needs you're actually trying to meet. So when you ask the question, what's the best car or the best car company, you can't answer that because being the best all depends on who you're trying to serve. If you're trying to serve young families, being the best is different than if you're trying to serve people like me. Serving people that want, luxury and performance, to be the best at that is very different than providing a very, very low cost, efficient, electric vehicle. There is no best way to compete. There are lots of good ways to compete depending on who you're trying to serve. So the number one principle of strategy is don't think this way. Instead, what you want to think about is how can I, in my company, be unique? How can I create unique value for the set of customers I choose to serve? Strategy is fundamentally about choice. It's making a set of choices, and the most fundamental choice is who am I trying to serve? And one of the worst mistakes in strategy is to try to serve everybody. You can't meet the need of every customer. You just can't do it. It's impossible. I've seen hundreds of companies try. It's impossible. You can't meet all the needs of every customer. Fundamentally, if you have a strategy, you've got to decide which needs of which customers you're actually going to seek to meet. That you might be able to do if you're clear about where you're heading. Another tremendous mistake in strategy is to get into a competition with your competitors on the same thing. If your competitor is trying to be the lowest cost, it's pretty unusual to win if you then try to chase them and be low cost. The essence of strategy is to find a unique position in your business that delivers unique value to the customers you choose to serve. Sounds simple, but most companies don't do it. Most companies are confused. They lack clarity on what strategy is. And in many companies, there is a fundamental inability to make choices, which ultimately lead to lack of success. Now, again, in a country like India, where growth has been relatively rapid, you can ride the rising tide and do okay. But I'm talking today about the companies that are going to be truly successful, not the ones that are just bumping along with the market. To be truly successful, we really need a strategy, and that strategy isn't about just being the best. Now, you know, the word strategy gets used a lot, and I always try to help companies I work with and people I work with kind of have a clear understanding of what we mean by a strategy. Here it is. Strategy is a set of choices we make, long-term choices, to distinguish ourselves from competitors. That's what it's all about. It defines how we're going to compete differently, and it also really articulates the competitive advantages that we will seek to create and use in order to win. Okay? So at a very high level, this is how I would define strategy. Again, note the word long-term. Strategy is about long-term. It's not about tomorrow and the next day. It's about the long term, because strategy takes a long time to put in place and implement. Strategy is about distinguishing yourself, being different. If you're doing the same thing as your competitor, you don't have a strategy. You're just trying to do the same thing better. That's what we call operational excellence. We'll talk about that in a minute. Strategy is around choices. What choices you make versus the choices that your competitors are making. Strategy then is different than just, we want to be number one or number two. That's not a strategy. Wanting to grow faster is not a strategy. Those are goals, those are aspirations. The strategy is the unique position that allows you to get to whatever goal you set. We can't confuse the strategy and the goal. We can't mix them up. We have to separate the goal we're trying to achieve, and then the strategy is how we're going to get there. Strategy is not just one thing, one step. Strategy is not to go international. That's not a strategy. Raising R&D is not a strategy. Strategy is holistic. It's the whole set of choices that you make collectively in order to position the company for success over time in the marketplace. It's not one step, it's a set of steps. Strategy involves all the functions. It includes marketing, production, finance, everything together to create that unique positioning. That's what strategy is all about. And strategy isn't vague. It's not a mission. It's very specific, as we'll see. So here's where we start with a sort of, we all have to get grounded in a clear idea of what we actually mean by a strategy. And once we start there, then we can start doing the analysis and making the choices necessary to get there. Now, many of you are public companies, and here we have an additional issue that a lot of companies get confused about. And that is, if you're a public company, we have a stock price, and everybody looks at the stock price. And what we also have to understand, if we're going to set a good strategy, is actually the stock price is not the goal. The stock price is a result. The goal is superior economic performance. Strategy is about creating superior economic performance in terms of return on capital and in terms of growth. Not 1 year, but on a sustained basis. Okay? And what we know is that it's economic performance that really creates value. price can go up or down depending on what happens in the world. That doesn't mean that value changed. The value is actually created by the economic performance. The ability to be profitable and earn a good return on capital and grow that business. What we've got to remember is when we set strategy, we have to focus on the economic performance part. We can't try to please the stock market. We can't try to figure out what today investors want. That's going to confuse us. It's going to pull us away from where we want to go. So I think, critical for strategy, particularly in public companies, is the idea that actually performance determines shareholder value, not the other way around. You'd be surprised. This sounds awfully simple. It's not. I work with hundreds of public company CEOs, and they get all confused about, well, what's the scorecard here? And the stock market is sort of a long-term, works pretty well as a scorecard. If you have good economic performance, eventually your stock price goes up. But in the short term, stock price is a lousy way of judging success. The markets can be way off. That's what we find in the studies on this question. So this is all about long-term sustained economic performance, and we have to have the courage to let the stock price take care of itself and not try to get crazy trying to please the analysts or deal with whatever criticism we're getting in the stock market. Now, when we think about strategy, again, another key principle, and then we're going to dig in a little bit, is strategy occurs at multiple levels in any company, in many companies, not every company. The core level of strategy is what we call business strategy. That's how to compete in each or in the distinct business in which you operate. So here, if you're in passenger cars, you'd have a strategy for passenger cars. That's business strategy. But in many companies, there's another level of strategy, which is what we call corporate strategy. And that has to do with the overall strategy of the diversified or multi-business company. We got a lot of conglomerates. I don't like the word conglomerate. Conglomerate is not a strategy. We got a lot of companies, though, that are more than one business. We got to have a strategy for each one of the businesses because that's in a different market, competing in a different way to serve different customers. But we also need to think about the overall strategy of the diversified group. And that is a very different animal. And there's a new set of principles or a different set of principles for thinking about that. Again, I find a lot of confusion. A lot of companies mix these up together. Corporate and business get mixed up. That's a mistake. We've got to keep these levels separately, and we'll talk about these briefly as we have time. Now let's talk about business unit strategy, and I'll go quite quickly because, again, I'm hopeful that most of you are pretty well grounded in the key ideas here. So what we understand is in a business, a particular business, the drivers of success and the key elements of strategy have to do with the industry itself, the business itself, and the position we choose to occupy in that business. Strategy is both together. Okay? What we understand is that industries are different in terms of the nature of competition. And we got to understand our industry. We got to understand how its competition is evolving, where it's heading, and what kind of competitive dynamics are we going to have to contend with. We've got to understand that business by business. And then, of course, we have to make those choices about where we're going to compete. But one of the things I find over and over again is often the health of your industry is just as important as how good a position you have. If you're in an industry that's in trouble, that's failing, you may have a great position, but that's not very valuable. So we got to learn to worry about our industry too. We have to help our industry thrive, not just focus only on our own position. Again, these are things that we've learned from many, many, many examples. In terms of industry analysis, hopefully everybody finds this familiar. We've after 20 or 25 years of work, we have overwhelming evidence that really industry competition is driven by these competitive forces that we introduced many years ago now. Those competitive forces collectively drive the fundamental attractiveness of the industry, the average profitability of the industry. Here's a simple example in the heavy truck industry in our country. Very difficult industry. If you look at this industry, you see a lot of competitive forces that are challenging. We have a lot of vicious competition on price among the truck manufacturers. We have high regulatory standards which are pushing up their cost to meet those standards, but it's very hard to pass those costs on to the customer because the customer is consolidating into larger and larger fleets and leasing companies that have a lot of bargaining power in order to push down the price. So the combination of rising regulatory costs and a powerful customer is squeezing the truck manufacturers. We see that to make heavy trucks, you make some of the parts in-house. Some companies make more, some companies make less, but you're also having to source things like engines and drivetrain components, axles and things like that. And many of the suppliers of those components that you're buying have very strong brands. And in fact, the trucking company specifies the brand of the parts that they want on the truck. They want a Cummins engine, for example. So you're buying from suppliers who have a lot of clout because they have their own relationship with the end customer. So that squeezes the truck companies, the truck manufacturers in the middle. This is in North America primarily, but the same basic structure exists in many other parts of the world. It actually isn't that hard to enter the industry. Threat of entry and entry barriers are a key part of industry analysis. It's actually harder to get the dealer network than it is to actually get the parts and assemble the truck. And then, of course, trucks are always competing with substitutes. Substitutes, again, all of us hopefully understand what a substitute is. A substitute is a different way of meeting the need that's not the same as your product, but meets the same need that your product does. So if you're a truck manufacturer, the customer doesn't need a truck if they're going to use the railroad, or if they're going to use water transportation. So particularly, as railroads have been a real tough competitor for trucks over the years. Okay, so this is a classic example of industry analysis. It's something that is timeless. Always, every single time you think about strategy, you have to have a systematic, rigorous understanding of your industry and what are the competitive drivers and how are they changing? Are they getting worse? Are they getting better? Where's the new competitive force coming from that you're going to have to deal with if you're going to win in that particular industry? Here's another example of an industry, industrial gases. This industry makes oxygen, hydrogen, argon, all these industrial gases that are increasingly used in production processes in all kinds of other industries. And your first look at this industry says, oh my God, this is a pretty tough industry. Because I'm selling industrial gases that are commodities. Hydrogen is hydrogen. How could I ever make money just selling a commodity gas? Particularly when I'm selling to a lot of customers who often have bargaining power. They're big manufacturing companies. Industrial gases are made with feedstocks like petrochemicals, and I have no control over the price of the feedstock. So if the feedstock price goes up, I'm in trouble. If I'm selling a commodity gas, again, not so good element of the industry. It's not that hard to get in. I mean, lots of people can figure out how to make helium or hydrogen and have a little facility in the factory. And many of the customers decide, well, this is not something I want to buy. I want to make my own industrial gases in-house and make them right in my factory, right on the production line. Okay? So again, here's an industry. Your first look says, not so good. I don't want to play here. That's your first instinct. But again, what we learn about industry analysis is we've got to be sophisticated. We can't just take the superficial look at the industry. We've got to dig down a little bit. And if we dig down in this industry, what we've learned is actually it's quite an exciting and interesting industry. In fact, the companies in this industry have done very well. And the reason is that if the superficial look doesn't really get at the true industry structure. So just an example is probably the most interesting thing about the industry is that the costs of transportation are very high. To move gas from your plant to your customer takes a big truck. It's very expensive to ship. It's got to be shipped under pressure, and you have to kind of have a big tanker truck, and it has to go to the customer site, and it has to unload the gas through, pumping it into the tank there. And transport cost means that in order to be efficient in this industry, you have to have density of customers. So if you have only one customer in Mumbai, and you have to drive all the way to Mumbai for one customer, and spend all that money to drive that truck full of helium here, and you get to offload a little bit for one customer, your costs are going to be very high. But if you come to Mumbai and you have 17 customers, and your truck goes from one to the next, and they're all close by, then actually that makes your business super efficient compared to the guy who's only going to deliver to one or two customers. Transportation costs take a very superficially lousy industry and make it into a very attractive industry. Because all of a sudden, if you have a dense group of customers in a given market, it's almost impossible for your competitor to attack you. It's just too expensive. They'll never be able to afford to win those customers. And it creates a lot of because you've got to build a customer base over a long period of time, and this is a very critical product for the manufacturing process. So you don't want to try some new company and not be sure that they'll show up. If they don't show up with your helium, you're in trouble in your plant. Okay? So again, I won't go through the details, but what I'm trying to get across here is that we all have to be really sophisticated at industry analysis in our businesses. We got to look below the surface. We can't just say, oh, this is a commodity, it's a lousy industry. It's a commodity, it's quite an attractive industry. Dig down, understand the real entry barriers, understand the real bargaining power of the customer and the supplier. And the people that could see this have built tremendous businesses in industry that nobody else wanted to go into. Which for the stock market thought this was a crummy industry for a long time. Boy, were they wrong. The investors that could understand how attractive this business was, boy, did they do well. Again, what we find in competition is that actually the concepts themselves are not that complicated, but actually applying them well is really hard. And that applies both to the companies but also to the investors that are trying to figure out whether a company is successful or will be successful. How do we achieve superior profitability in the industry, whatever the industry attractiveness looks like? Well, that has to do with the two fundamental types of competitive advantage. And this never changes and never will change. There's only two ways to get an advantage. One is to differentiate yourself, do something better, customer will pay you more for it. Because you're delivering something the customer thinks is better. It could be design, it could be image, it could be functionality, it could be service, it could be almost anything. But, you know, competitive advantage number one is differentiating and getting a higher price. And if you're differentiating, you better get a higher price. Because if you're not getting a higher price, then you have to, are we really differentiating? If nobody's willing to pay us extra, are we really better? And that's a kind of a tough, honest question we have to ask ourselves. The other kind of competitive advantage is lower cost. If we can actually do something cheaper and more efficiently, and that's not just luck, that's not just, oh, we bought a lower cost parts this week. But if we can find a way of structurally being lower cost because we've redesigned the way we do things, that's the other kind of competitive advantage. And really the broadest thinking about strategy starts with, okay, which path are we on? Are we on a path to differentiate? Are we on a path to be the lowest cost? Those are both good paths, depending on the circumstances. But we got to usually decide which path we're going to be on, because if we're going to really differentiate and have better quality and better service and better educated sales force, it's going to be hard to at the same time be lower cost. That's what we've learned. So we've got to figure out what path we're on. And then we have to turn it into a strategy using the value chain. And again, I hope everybody here is familiar with that concept. It's quite embedded now in management thinking. The value chain says, for any business, there's a whole set of things that we have to do in order to conduct that business. Logistical things, operating things, which could be manufacturing, marketing, sales, service, supply chain, technology development. You see this, and this idea called the value chain is a way of mapping what operation in this industry looks like. And this slide is just an example in the telecom, in the mobile communication business. So a Sprint or an AT&T in our country, here's the value chain in that business. So you can see, if you go back, this is sort of a general set of titles, but this says, okay, now in mobile phones, we don't say we have to talk about device coverage. What set of mobile phone types do we support in our network? And then there's we got to have a network. We got to operate the network and make that network efficient so you get the bars and you don't lose your service and you can hear and so forth. And then we got to figure out how to price. Pricing is very complicated in mobile phones. All kinds of special deals, prepaid, postpaid. So there's a lot of choices and activity there. Bill processing, there's a lot of marketing, promotion, PR, after-sales support, and so forth. So every business has a value chain. Every one of your businesses has a value chain. And if you're going to be disciplined and rigorous about strategy, you've got to really lay out what that value chain is. Because strategy is fundamentally the set of choices you make across the value chain. So what kind of network am I going to operate? What's my pricing approach? How am I going to distinguish myself from a competitor? What tools am I going to use for marketing? Am I going to have a lot of physical locations and stores, or I'm going to use primarily advertising? What am I going to do to market my service versus the other guy, and so forth and so on. Strategy isn't sort of any esoteric thing. It's simply a set of choices about how we are going to operate the business, including choices about the technology we're going to sell, you know, the function of our product, the features of our product, the technology of our product. A good strategy is one where there's clarity on the choices we're really making. And there's enough things that we're doing differently that we can get a competitive advantage. So let's talk a little bit more about that. The first kind of key idea here in going from kind of a value chain to strategy is the notion of operational effectiveness versus strategic position. This is an idea that I didn't have when I first published my first books in this field. I was thinking mostly about strategy, but I didn't really make the distinction that there's a lot that a company does that isn't strategy. There's a lot of best practice. If we're going to be in the auto industry, there's a lot of things we have to do just to be a good auto company. You know, we have to buy the right kind of machines for our factory. We have to have, you know, a decent dealer network. We have to, you know, learn how to execute good advertising. There's a lot of best practice in every industry. And what we've learned is if you're not using best practice, you're going to lose, no matter what your strategy is. If you're not buying the latest manufacturing equipment, your competitors are going to win. You're going to give up too much cost and quality through that. So what we have to understand is in any company we have two jobs. One is we got to implement all the best practices that we can find. If we see somebody doing a better approach to customer care, you know, we better look hard at that and make sure that we're at least at some, you know, threshold level of best practice. That's operational effectiveness. But operational effectiveness is not strategy. Operational effectiveness is doing the same things as your competitor better and better and better. It's raising the bar on the same things as all your competitors are doing. Your competitors have a factory, they have machines. If you buy the newest machines first, then you'll have an advantage. You'll be operationally better than them until they buy the machines. But that's not strategy. Strategy is on top of operational effectiveness. You've got to sort of operate the business well, but on top of that, you have to have a strategy. And that strategy is building on the best practices, but then including the choices that are going to define your uniqueness in the business. Both of these things are important. If we're just sloppy and not enhancing our operational effectiveness, we're going to lose, no matter what strategy we have. But just being operationally effective is not going to get us to superior performance because all our competitors are going to be implementing the same best practices as we do. So if we really want to win, we got to do both. And we've got to make sure that we're clear about what we're doing. And this is a very important distinction. You know, the question I used to get all the time, you know, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, can you be both low cost and differentiated at the same time? And the answer is usually you can't. But the cases that look like you're doing that are cases where the competitor has lousy operational effectiveness. Then you can be both low cost and differentiated. But if you've got a good operationally effective competitor, then to differentiate or to be lower cost, you're going to have to make real choices. Okay? And you're not going to be able to do those both at the same time probably. You're going to have to decide which path you're on. Am I on the path of differentiating? Am I on the path of being the lowest cost producer? To have a successful strategy, we've come to understand that the process involves, these basic conditions. Number one, to have a truly successful strategy, we have to define a unique value proposition. We can't just be trying to do the same thing as our competitors are trying to do. We have to be doing something unique, and that involves serving a different set of customers. We're going after the large industrials. Our competitors are going after the medium-sized, smaller companies. That's one part of the value proposition. What customers are we actually trying to serve? Again, so many companies, the customers they have, they sort of got by luck. But one of the most important ideas and strategies, you've got to choose your customers. You actually have to choose who you want your customers to be. And if you choose, I want all customers, I want to serve every single customer, that's usually not a good choice. Because customers have very different needs, particularly in a complex economy like this one. Another question you've got to ask is, of the customers I choose to serve, which of the needs that they have do I want to actually meet uniquely well? Again, a lot of companies just fall into the idea that anything the customer wants, I'm going to try to provide. But actually, most great strategies don't do that. Or at very least, they're very specific about which customer group, and then they say, okay, I'm going to go after this customer group, and I'm going to then really meet all their needs. But the idea that we just try to meet all the needs that anybody ever comes and asks us to meet, that's usually not a good strategy. And then we're going to have to make that choice about pricing. Are we going for a premium price? Are we trying just to match the other guy? Are we going to offer a discount because we think we're going to be more efficient and able to sustain that discount and still make good profits? This is a company that's on its way to India. I don't think it's actually opened yet. It's been struggling to get into India, like historically a number of companies have had to do. This is one of the most extraordinary companies in the world in the area of furnishings. IKEA, some people call it IKEA. It depends on, are you speaking more Scandinavian? Are you speaking more American? And this is a company that sells home furnishings. And this is kind of a great strategy example. Strategy starts with a unique value proposition. And what you see here is kind of a sort of simple description of what their value proposition is. Who are the customers that they really are seeking to serve? And what are they delivering those customers in terms of products to meet those needs? And where are they pricing? Okay, so I won't read this, but just take a quick look at that, okay? And, the interesting thing about this value proposition is nobody had ever seen this before, this company. Nobody had ever segmented customers in this way. Nobody had ever thought about customers with relatively small living spaces before. This was an innovation in thinking about segmentation. And a lot of great strategies involve this new way of looking at customers and segmenting customers, like these guys did. Also, this strategy was a real breakthrough in, kind of operations for a furniture company. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Here's another great strategy example. Remember I talked about heavy trucks earlier and how difficult an industry it was. The average profitability not so good. Well, here's the company in the industry that is the premium, superior, high profitability company. It's called PACCAR. It's quite a global company. And you sort of see what their value proposition was. So IKEA was about really low prices. This company is about a premium. We're going to get a premium, 10%, for our trucks. Because our trucks are not going to look like our competitors' trucks, our trucks are going to, we're going to have a strategy about customization, cost of operation, that will allow us to actually differentiate. But not for all. This is a wonderful strategy because this company figured out that the big customers in the industry weren't the customers that were the good customers for them. They actually figured out that the small customers, the people that owned one truck and drove that truck for their living, that was the really interesting customer in this industry. So they built a whole strategy around this narrow group of customers. About 25 to 30% of all the customers that buy trucks buy one or two trucks. And they often drive their own truck. Okay? Second test of a great strategy, again, think about your own company here. A distinctive value chain. If you don't operate the business differently, your value chain isn't going to be real. You got to have a different operating model that aligns with your positioning. Okay? So if we take IKEA, and I won't go through this, if you look at how they operate their company compared to all the other companies in their industry, they do it differently. They have a different value chain. Their stores look different. Their customer service looks different. Their logistics looks different. And it's all aligned with that value proposition. Their breakthrough idea was that they wouldn't, that they sell not fully assembled furniture, they assemble parts. They sell parts in a box. So when you go to IKEA, you walk out with a box in which there are the parts of the furniture you just bought. And you get the opportunity to actually take the furniture home yourself. You don't get somebody with a van, delivering, dropping off completed furniture at your house. IKEA understood that was good. A lot of customers like that. But the customers they wanted to serve, who was very price sensitive, they were willing to deliver themselves. They would deliver their own furniture. And by doing it that way, and by also having inbound logistics in not entire sofas, but the parts for a sofa in a box, they saved huge amounts of logistical costs. And they took that savings and they passed it on to the customer in terms of a much lower price. But the customer then had to put the furniture together themselves. I have a daughter, one of my daughters happens to love this company, and I had the privilege of helping her, renting a car when I visited her in college so that we could take the box home from IKEA. I went to IKEA many times. And then you have to take the box home, and then you have then you get to put it together. It's like somebody's birthday. You have to put together the birthday present, or Christmas. It's like putting together the toys. That can be fun. I frankly found it very tedious. I didn't have a lot of fun doing it. But my daughter really liked this company. The value proposition worked for her. It didn't actually work for me. In fact, I pretty much hated every minute I was in that store. I didn't like the service. There is no service. They deliberately organize the store so you get lost. And you can't get out. When you're checking out, you have to go to these big, huge racks, and you have to pull down the box of what you're buying. And schlep the box, to the check-in counter, and then pay your bill. And then you have to take the box out and load it in your car, and then you have to drag the box up to the apartment of your daughter, in my case. And then you get to spend 30 or 40 minutes trying to figure out how to put the thing together. Not a good idea for me. My daughter loved it. it met her needs for reasonable price. They have very nicely designed products and style products, very Scandinavian, but they're very low cost. They're really high quality, really low cost. That worked for her. And this tells you something very important about strategy. And that is that one of the things a great strategy does is it doesn't please every customer. If you're trying to please every customer, you don't have a strategy. A good strategy makes some customers unhappy. If every customer is happy, you're in trouble. If every possible customer in the industry likes what you're doing, then the odds are that you'll never really be successful. Strategy is fundamentally about choosing who exactly you are trying to please, and then engineering a value chain in order to deliver on that. Here's PACCAR. Another critical part of a successful strategy is the concept of trade-offs. A trade-off is where, in order to deliver one benefit, you give up on another benefit. And that's what IKEA did. They to get that really low price of nicely styled furniture, and in order to do that, you had to go through an awkward experience in the store, you had to take the product home yourself, and you had to put it together yourself. And that was a trade-off that they were willing to make, because they understood that's what their customers really, that was the trade-off they wanted to make. Strategy's about choice, about choosing what you want to do. But one of the phrases that I said at some point, and I found has been very powerful, is the essence of strategy is what you choose not to do. It's the service you don't offer. It's the functions you don't provide. It's the benefit you don't offer. That's the essence of strategy. If you can be clear about that, that's a good sign that you can be clear about your overall strategy. Okay, so time is very short. But in terms of a successful strategy, we've got to connect the dots across the value chain. We've got to make sure the service connects with the way we market, connects with our kind of product value proposition. The pieces fit together across the value chain, and there's continuity. You can't be changing strategy all the time. It takes like 2-3 years to implement a strategy, because you got to get all those pieces aligned around what your ultimate position is, and continuity becomes crucial. Okay, again, you can look at some of these examples and talk about it even further. When we think about strategy, one of the things that I find very helpful to think about, and might be helpful for you, is what kind of competition are we creating in our industry? And the wrong answer is we're creating a zero-sum competition. We're all doing the same thing, beating each other up on price. That's not the competition we want. What we want to create is really more of a positive-sum competition where we all have a different strategy. We're all trying to do something a little bit different. We're serving different customers. We're trying to meet different needs. That's the kind of competition we want. That's the competition where actually the whole industry can be more attractive and competitors can do well. In terms of corporate strategy, again, I've already covered the idea that there's multiple levels. If you're in a very large group, there might be a third level. There might be groups of businesses clumped together because the whole company has so many businesses that to manage it, you've got to clump it into groups. So there might be a level of group strategy. What are the key questions of corporate level strategy? First of all, understanding what different businesses you're in becomes really critical. Because you need a strategy for each distinct business. And sometimes companies get confused. In fact, what I find is usually you think of your business too broadly. And you don't realize that actually the truck industry is not one industry. There's heavy trucks and light trucks, and those are totally different businesses. So, key question for corporate strategy is sorting out what the different businesses are. Do we have the right portfolio? Is each business attractive in and of itself? And then are we the best owner for the business? Does the business reinforce each other? Do we have synergy? Is there a logic for how the businesses fit together? And so on. Okay, these are the key questions of corporate level strategy. It's a different animal. It builds on business strategy, but it's different. Ultimately, in corporate strategy, we're trying to create synergies across businesses. If there's no synergies, we're probably better off, selling it, because we're not going to be able to add any value. And this just talks about the kind of synergies that we might be pursuing, and we got to make sure they're real. We got to make sure they're actually meaningful. They're not just a little benefit, but they're a big deal. Here's the ultimate synergy company. Disney, that has many, many different businesses, but they're all united in a common positioning, basic value proposition. They're sharing lots of resources like characters and video properties and so forth, leveraging across all these businesses. And this company has been remarkably robust in a very unstable industry, where some years you make a good film, the next year you make a lousy film, people go up and down. But Disney has a real robust corporate strategy that's given them a lot of resilience over time. And then I guess let me finish up this section by talking about, well, what's our job as leaders in strategy? And what I found is that the head of a business unit, and the CEO of the overall corporation, ultimately, you have to be the chief strategist. The reason is that nobody else has the right perspective for strategy except the ultimate leader. Everybody down in the organization is thinking about their part of the company, their business, their function, the marketing department, the production department, the R&D. The only person that really has the true strategy perspective is the person that's actually running the overall business. So you've got to use your people to get information. You've got to make it a team process, but ultimately you have to decide. Strategy can't be a popularity contest where everybody gets a vote. Because essence of strategy is about choices. And we got to make one clear set of choices. We can't have sort of, oh, well, we'll do this, and we'll do this, and we'll do this, and we'll do this. Oh, yes, marketing, I know you want to do this. We'll do a little bit of that, too. You end up in, you're not going to do well. You're not going to have a strategy. You, as the CEO, got to make sure that you have a great strategy process. You got to make sure that, first of all, you've got the right business units organized, and you got a great team working on a strategy for each of those business units. You got to make sure they're answering the right questions. You shouldn't ask the question of how much is the industry going to grow for the next 10 years and think that's the key question. That's one. A lot of other key questions every strategy has to address. The industry, where do we stand today? How would we benchmark our performance across the value chain? Who are our key competitors? How are they doing? Where do they stand? What do their value chains look like? There's a lot of key questions in a good strategy, and the only person who's going to make sure you have the right questions is you. Because you're the person that's actually in charge of pulling it together and making the choices at the end of the day. You got to make sure the right are involved in the strategy process. That's your job as a leader. And what we know is strategy has to be done collectively by the multifunctional team. We create strategy to each functional department and let them do the production strategy and the marketing strategy and the service strategy. That never works. We got to get those people together doing the strategy together, because all those pieces have to fit together. There's no such good marketing. There's only good marketing for a particular strategy. So we can't let the marketing guys go running off and do good marketing. We've got to put their role in the context of the overall positioning we're trying to achieve in the market. That's what great strategy is all about. And guess whose job it is to make sure that happens? You. The person who has the overall holistic perspective of the business. Your board of directors, we found, you need to let your board of directors see the strategy before they have to approve it. Board of directors want to participate in the process. Now, it's not their job to develop the strategy, but they're usually smart people, and it's very helpful to get their input. And then you can come back to them with what you want them to approve. And as long as they've been part of the process and felt like they got some ownership in the process, they're going to be really comfortable. But if you just show up one day and say, here's my strategy, everybody vote yes, then you're going to erode your capital with the board. And you're going to need the board to support you, because every company has ups and downs. And you need the board to be there and understand where you're doing and how you're doing it, and so that when things go wrong, they don't panic. And if the stock price goes down, they don't freak out. A great strategy needs the commitment of the board, the awareness of the board, the understanding of the board, and so how to bring them into the process without them thinking they do it. That's your job as a leader. And depending on your company and how serious your issues are, you've got to calibrate how much you want to play directly in the process versus sort of oversee the process, and that really depends on the situation. If you got a real turnaround, you're going to have to lead the whole process. If you've come in a really bad situation, you're just going to have to lead the whole thing. Don't delegate it to strategic planning. If you're in a pretty stable company and you got a good team, then your job is really to set the right process up and then check in and see how they're doing. One of the things we've learned, I've done a lot, I've trained now probably 350 of the top CEOs in the world. They come to Harvard for a boot camp. We call it the New CEO Workshop. And when a CEO gets appointed, we invite them, and we have about a dozen, 2 or 3 times a year, come together as a group, and we go through, okay, what do you have to do to be a successful CEO? And we know a lot about that. And we go through that process. And one of the things we do in that workshop is we talk a lot about why a great leader doesn't want to have to reject the work of his team or her team. And the worst thing you want to have to reject is the strategic plan. People do a lot of work, they think very hard, they get themselves all excited, and they come together with a great plan and they're presented to you. The worst thing that you have to do is say no. Because if you reject that plan, first of all, it's a reflection that you created a lousy process. The wrong people, the wrong questions. It's also a sign that you didn't check in to see if they were moving in the right direction. You want to make sure that they're thinking the right way, they're on the right path. Encourage them to, don't do it for them, but check in. What you want to do in a strategy process is you want to be really happy and say, that's a great work, that's great work. And then you're going to motivate your team. to really be responsible and to really move the business forward. But if you reject their strategy because you didn't really pay much attention to what they were doing and you're just having the meeting, at the end of 6 months, then what's going to happen? You're going to have to do it. Everyone of your team is always going to want you to approve anything before they do too much work on it. They're going to create dependence on you as the leader. So, as a leader, one of your most critical jobs is to essentially create the right processes to allow your team to succeed. And check in. So that if people get off on the wrong track that you're not comfortable with, you don't have to reject their work at the end. What you want to do as a CEO is you want to celebrate the work of your team. You want to celebrate the strategy that they've come up with, that you're comfortable with because you were there and you orchestrated the process and you checked in and you gave feedback and the group learned and here we are with something great. That's what strategic leadership is all about at your level. The people, most of you in this room, are at that level. Okay? So that is, I think, for me anyway, from doing this many, many times still every year, this is kind of the fundamental ideas that I think we all have to really understand and then turn into reality if we're going to have a great strategy. So, Amit, I guess we have some time for some Q&A. Let's open the up. These slides we'll post. They'll be available to you. You can go into the details. There are many more that you can access through my websites and other materials. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there's nothing more important in building a really world-class company than getting this stuff right. So Amit,
Thank you, Professor.
open it up.
So.